day to day, I'm usually dealing with nursing staff at the facilities, but I'll work with providers, regional medical directors of large medical groups or departments of corrections. Sometimes I'm working with non-medical personnel like jail administrators. A lot of things that, I've learned just by working at Diamond that necessarily I would never have any educative process in school, in pharmacy school, just things that I never imagined that I'd be doing right now.
Podcast RX.
Podcast RX.
Podcast RX. Podcast RX. Welcome to Podcast RX from Diamond Pharmacy, a show featuring the pharmacists and personnel behind the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. While we talk primarily about clinical and regulatory topics affecting the institutional healthcare clients we serve, we'll also occasionally get into the stories behind the people moving our company forward. This isn't just a pharmacy podcast, and you don't have to be a clinician or a pharmacist to enjoy it. On this episode, we welcome, for the first time, executive consultant pharmacist Tim Welsh. As a youngster growing up in the eastern suburbs of Pittsburgh, Tim's fascination with drugstores and his admiration for a local pharmacist set him on a career path that made stops at Duquesne University, retail chains, and ultimately, Diamond. With 26 years at Diamond now under his belt, Tim looks back at his formative pharmacy experiences and sheds light on the unique challenges and rewards of being a consultant pharmacist for correctional and long-term care facilities. If you have little understanding of the role of pharmacists beyond the retail and hospital settings, as Tim himself once did, then you'll definitely want to listen to our conversation. I'm Adam Campbell, and this is Podcast RX. Tim Welsh, welcome to what I hope is one of many appearances here on Podcast RX. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you today?
Good. How about yourself?
Oh, can't complain. It's a new month. The sun is shining again. It feels good. That was a relentlessly gray January, so it's good to be here in February.
Yes, it's almost like a little summer break for us with the sun and close to 50 in February. So
That's right. So, Tim, you're an executive consultant pharmacist, and you have decades here working at Diamond. Just how long have you been here?
I'm coming up on my 26th year.
26th year.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Now, we're going to talk all about your time here and what you've experienced in those 26 years. But to give a sense of what you do, you work closely with corrections and long-term care facilities, and you've done that. You've had this executive role for quite some time. So I wanted to have you on because the last few episodes we really devoted to clinical topics. And I thought, let's switch things up for this first episode of 2024, because last year, about a year ago, we recorded an episode with your colleague, John Krupe, and it had a fun biographical bent to it. And I thought we could use an episode like that with one of our executive consultants.
Sounds good.
And I also wanted to get a better sense of what you and your colleagues do, especially in the correction space, shine a bigger light on this area of the pharmacy practice. So, Tim, you're an easily recognizable guy, you're a likable guy, and you're a talkative guy. So I thought nobody better to give us a glimpse of this consultant pharmacist role than you. So again, thank you for coming on. I'd just say, let's go all the way back. Tim, where'd you grow up? What inspired you to pursue a pharmacy career?
I'm from the Monroeville, Murraysville area, east suburbs of Pittsburgh. Oddly enough, I was fascinated with drugstores as a kid. My grandmother had a beauty shop in Turtle Creek, or for the non-Pittsburghers, Creek.
Yes.
So, and a couple doors down from her shop was John's Leader Drugstore. So she would take me in there quite frequently. And it was sort of fascinating going in there as a kid. It was your typical old school drugstore. John would always come out, talk to my gram, and he'd always make it a point to talk to me and my sister. And it was just a fun place. And I saw how he interacted with his customers, just with the medications, and also just coming out front in the front part of the store. And I always thought about John or whatever and how kind he was to my grandmother. So.
Oh. And how old were you when you first have memories of going to John's and having that impression made on you?
Yeah, that was definitely grade school years or what have you. I mean, subsequently, the store closed and John retired, but that's definitely a memory um, um, from me and my sister when we were in grade school, maybe early part of junior high.
Sure. And when then did that translate into, I really love the example this community pharmacist set. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. So junior, senior year of high school at Franklin Regional, um, as per usual, I guess you could say, I went on several college tours my senior year, and one of the ones I went to was Duquesne. And then I remember the setup there and looked at different majors, but I went to that one specifically looking at the School of Pharmacy and talked to some, at that time, current students. And I had been accepted to a couple other colleges, a couple different majors, but once I got accepted to the School of Pharmacy at Duquesne, that sort of sealed the deal, and
Yeah.
the rest is history, I guess. So,
Yeah. What was the best part about attending Duquesne?
I really liked being in the city. The campus was great. It was almost like a little, not walled off, but it was up on the bluff, as it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Just a really nice campus. We had a pharmacy class. The majority of us knew each other very well. It was a tight knit class, which I think is the case
Mm-hmm.
for most of the classes. But I'm still friends, keep contact with several members of that class. In fact, two of my coworkers here at Duquesne
Yeah.
are Duquesne School, graduated in '92 with myself. So,
Wow. What was life like coming out of there? Where did you work after you left pharmacy school?
I graduated in '92. When I first came out of school, I had signed with Thrift Drug, very popular regional chain in Western Pennsylvania in some areas. It was a great company to work for. It subsequently got sold to Eckerd, and I did work
Mm-hmm.
as an Eckerd pharmacist for a year. When I first came out of school, they didn't have a place for me in Pittsburgh, so I went out to Chester County.
Yeah.
Worked in a little town called Kennett Square.
Mm-hmm.
I did miss home, but it was a great area. I really liked it.
Yeah.
A spot opened up at the big Miracle Mile store in Monroeville, which was sort of like a hometown store for me. And at the time, I think it was one of only two 24-hour stores in the Pittsburgh area. So it was a hopping place.
Yeah.
I worked there, thrift / Eckerd Drug, until I came to Diamond here in 1998.
Now, what about Diamond attracted you to make the jump from where you were?
I had a little bit of burnout going on in retail. Like I said, it was a busy store.
Yep.
A colleague of mine that works here, Jeff DiGiorgio, he worked at a thrift in a different part of Monroeville. We had talked, just amongst pharmacists, transferring prescriptions, checking stock, just discussing, things between the different thrift stores. Long story short, I guess he had interviewed at Diamond a couple of months before he knew I was getting a little bit burnout in the retail space. He did not take the job with Diamond immediately, but he recommended it to me, how he was impressed with Gib and Joanne, and it just didn't work out for him personally at that time. So I did, I'd never been to Indiana, Pennsylvania before. I drove up, Gilbert, he gave me a tour of Indiana, and then I had my interview with Gib, Joanne, and John Avolio, and the rest is history. And subsequently, I gave feedback back to Jeff about how I enjoyed it, and he followed me after giving me the initial recommendation, I believe within a year or two of me starting at Diamond, and Jeff's still here to this day. So.
Sure. Oh, and I imagine that tour, the personalized tour of Indiana with Gib, was something.
Yes, it was in the infamous green Jeep Cherokee. And, I was nervous. Gib was very, very welcoming. As we all know, his personality shone through.
Mhm.
I just recall he said, hop in. He brushed his cigar ashes off the seat. And then he took me a tour around town. And I'll never forget, it was both frightening and made me laugh. We were going past like Beacon Ridge, and he was showing me, I believe at the time it was called Beacon Manor.
Mhm.
And he's talking to me, and we're just chit chatting, and he's looking at me in the passenger seat while he's driving, and he hopped the median a little bit with the curb or whatever. And again, the rest was history. So
Sure.
like I really enjoyed that day with Gib or whatever, show me around town, and just that personal touch that he had
Mhm.
was something that I was not getting from Eckerd at the time. So it just felt like I was coming to a pharmacy, family oriented, with an individual sort of kind of remind me of John from growing up
Yeah.
when I was younger. So
That's great that it came so full circle in a way like that
it
for
did,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gib sort of reminded me of an old school pharmacist. And of course, he did mention like all the years in retail. And, he was so excited to show me at that time Diamond's incarnation on Coulter Drive as like the new building and everything like that. And it was sort of infectious. And I was hoping, I'd get the job. And, I didn't know if I was going to get a call back in a week or two, but I pretty much shook hands with them that, you can
Mhm.
start whenever you want. And, I put my 2 weeks in with Eckerd, and here I am still.
Yeah. What did they bring you in as? What?
I was just a staff pharmacist
Okay.
at the time. And I worked actually as long as I've been here. I was a staff / what we call now a production pharmacist up until I believe when I moved into my current role about, I want to say 8 years ago. Um, I enjoyed that. I liked working early shifts. I worked a lot of second shift. I worked midnight shifts. I got into the skilled nursing home consulting much earlier than in corrections, although I did help with correctional facility inspections because of the need, just because of the sheer amount of inspections, that Diamond had to cover at the time. But basically, I was hired because we got our first big um, DOC contract out of state,
Mhm.
and they needed some of the current pharmacists to be on the more on the road and or handle the DOC contract. So they needed um, pharmacists in production. And probably the first 2 or 3 years I worked here, I worked primarily as a production pharmacist on the skilled and nursing home side. And then I just morphed into working correctional shift as well.
What was that transition like coming from the real hectic world of retail to this? I mean, we talked about the personal touch, the more intangible stuff, the atmosphere. But what about strictly from a pharmacist perspective and the practice of it? What was that like for you making those adjustments?
It did take a little bit. At the time, I don't think pharmacy schools in general really, like, I sort of even didn't know, like, that pharmacists work in long term care, personal care, corrections. Like, when I graduated, you pretty much either went to retail or hospital.
Mhm.
Not all the time, but I mean, those were the two major things. So I had some pharmacists, the great John Allen, trained me on the nursing home side, as long as Eric Pash as well. So they sort of trained me with that. And it was a lot at first or whatever. And then, I really came to enjoy it. It was different. It was a different challenge. So I really liked it.
Yeah. Do you ever miss retail at all?
Not chain retail. Now, it's been some time, but in my time here at Diamond, I have filled in at, it's been several years, but in little bits, I have enjoyed really working at our retail store filling in, although the need hasn't existed for that for quite some time. So, but as a rule, no. And especially talking with a lot of my colleagues, non-Diamond colleagues that in the pharmacy space and the chain pharmacists are having a rough go of it right now.
Yeah, most definitely. And how, just to go back, so you got into skilled first, skilled consulting, and then corrections. How did that skilled role open up? Or you may have explained that and I just missed it. But.
No, that they needed pharmacists to check the daily orders, the initial order review and the final product on the nursing home side. There did become a need where they needed skilled consultants to go out in the field. When I was hired, there wasn't, but within a couple of years of me being here, I got my first consulting gig, I guess you could say, at a nursing home. So again, John Allen, Jan Druschel, Eric Pash, Joe Kennedy, all sort of helped train me in that regard. So.
Well, as you got more into that skilled role, and then you got into correctional facilities with the consulting. Aside from the obvious differences between the two patient groups, what are some noteworthy differences in how you approach each group as a practicing pharmacist with your consulting?
Honestly, it's not very different. It really isn't. The demographics of the patients may be different, but a lot of the day-to-day work is very similar. Working with the facilities, working with the nurses, the providers. There's different regulations for each subset, but a lot of them are very similar, actually.
Okay. As far as the travel goes, that's a big part of what you do. How do you enjoy that?
It's sort of comical. All the nursing home consulting that I've done, it's always been within driving distance. And right now I have 2 nursing facilities that I'm the consultant for, and I've been the consultant for goodness, probably close to 15 years on each of them. Now with corrections, a lot of it is based for me in Virginia, but when I was hired as what we call internally an ECP, I hadn't flown since my early 20s, and I actually was sort of afraid to fly. And some of my office coworkers would sort of laugh at me for that or what have you. And then they pretty much pushed me into a role where it needed to be done. And then once I started doing it, it's really not an issue. It's been amazing. Like I don't travel as some of maybe middle of the road compared to some of my others in my same position. But I've been able to see Texas, Virginia, Idaho, California, Florida, just places I had never been to in my life before. Sure. So some of the days are very long, layovers, missed flights, rental cars gone awry, all of those things that anybody that travels for work deals with. But I consider myself very lucky to be able to see different parts of the country that I'd never seen before. So.
And I got to think the opportunity to build relationships with all these different healthcare staff, whether in the more local skilled facilities or in these far-flung locales that you just described, that's got to be pretty special too.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've dealt with some people, especially in Virginia, for close to 20 years. It's been amazing. They've become friends outside of work. Individuals that I text or connect with on social media. it's really, really neat to make lifelong friends and acquaintances, through this job traveling.
No doubt. Now, about your job itself, corrections pharmacy in particular is a fairly niche sector, and maybe long-term care to a lesser degree. But just as far as what you're doing each day, the nuts and bolts of what you do, Tim, can you give me an idea of that? Who are you communicating with most days? What are some example problems that you solve as a consultant, and just what's it look like to someone who has no clue?
I'd say day to day, I'm usually dealing with nursing staff at the facilities, but I'll work with providers, um, regional medical directors of large medical groups or departments of corrections. Sometimes I'm working with non-medical personnel like jail administrators, things of that nature. Sometimes auditors, just a lot of things that, I've learned just by working at Diamond that necessarily I would never have any um, educative process in school, in pharmacy school, just things that I never imagined that I'd be doing right now.
24, 25 years on, what aspects would you say are the most challenging, and on top of that, the most rewarding?
It's a little bit challenging, but in a good way. Just brushing up on clinical information. So you have to keep up to date with that, both nursing home and corrections. Um, a lot of times it's very, especially when I deal with correctional facilities with different states. Um, every board of pharmacy might have different interpretations and different statutes that you have to keep in mind depending on where a facility is located. Thankfully, we have a legal team here at Diamond to help us, decipher some of those differences. Um, of course, there's a lot of regulation with the DEA. Um, we have to be cognizant of all those things as well. As far as rewarding, it's really nice on the nursing home side. Like a lot of times, I'll be able to um, even interact with the residents when I do my monthly visits. So, um, and then on the correction side, it's always great to troubleshoot when a facility's, trying to resolve an issue. Clinically, even IT related, shipping difficulties, just working with the nursing staff. Basically, I consider myself, and I'll give full credit to my office mate, Chris Secuto, because he explained it to me as being a Outlook technician. So a lot of our communications come via email, and probably the majority of them, but you just tackle each email and try to be an advocate for your customer and resolve their problems, issues. And when something when you just get a simple thank you or hey, I appreciate it, that's truly all that I really need. So
From your perspective, now that you've been doing this a long time, how has the role of the consultant evolved? Okay.
I think what I've seen most definitely is from, let's say, in my time from late 90s, early 2000s, is, and this would just be on both sides, is definitely a more collaboration between the pharmacists and the providers. I'm not saying it didn't exist before, but it's certainly more common now. You're part of interdisciplinary teams, whether it may be a fall committee, I apologize, infection control, now COVID, post COVID. I mean, vaccinations, helping facilities with PPE at the time, testing. I think I just saw a couple of days ago that in Pennsylvania that pharmacists are approved as state Medicaid providers now. I mean, that's just, things have come a long way.
What are just looking at your job again real quick to ask you one more question about your nuts and bolts, what you do each day. What are some features or maybe even bugs of your job that would surprise people?
When I first explain to people that maybe aren't coworkers, they're very surprised that I go into correctional facilities. It sort of comes with some sort of stigma or what have you, but now, of course, I'm well used to it, but like there was nothing ever to be concerned with for me personally. Working with those nurses and providers has been amazing over the years. They give the same exact care in that space as any other space. So things that maybe that you don't see, maybe a little bit different. We have to be aware of drugs of abuse or misuse in corrections. Now, of course, that's everywhere, but there's a little bit of a difference there. Medication that may be asked for that your providers may not necessarily be aware that there might be some other reason why, an individual might be pursuing that medication. So,
yeah, we've done a podcast in the past on diversion, and what a fascinating topic that is. So, yeah, I imagine the creativity keeps ratcheting up over time too.
Yeah, and it's amazing too because the creativity. I was at a facility not too long ago, and there's an individual there that was incarcerated, and he would make from just a minimal amount of material. He'd make model cars and model trains, and I've gone to a couple of facilities where they have entire walls, murals of some of the most amazing artwork that I've ever seen by individuals in corrections. So,
well, we're about to the end of our time here, but I wanted to wrap it up with these two questions. So, Tim, now 26 years as a practicing pharmacist, what would you say is your proudest professional moment or accomplishment? You had to pick one.
I used to have some difficulty with a certain provider making recommendations. I never took it personally, anything like that. It was always sort of dismissive of the consultant pharmacist role and pretty much ignored all the communication that I made to him in the facility or what have you. And then one time when I was on site and I noticed something a little bit concerning, I guess, with a duplication of therapy. And I brought it to the nursing staff attention, and the doctor happened to be in the facility that day. And he came towards me later in the day when I was reviewing charts, and I thought I was in for a browbeating or a little bit of a sarcastic comment. And he just put his hand on my shoulder, just gave me a knowing nod. And after that, we had a great relationship or whatever. So there have been many, but that's one that always stuck out or whatever that I think about. So
always comes back to those relationship building moments.
Yes, correct. So, yeah.
Well, given that you've had the journey that's a lot of your colleagues have here, from retail now to this institutional space, what would you say to pharmacy students who are looking to pursue a career just out of school, going right into what you're doing rather than going the retail route? If they're interested in that, what things would you say to convince them that this is the way to go as far as a career? What
I think they definitely should pursue it. Like the students coming out today have so much more clinical training than I had that they could put a lot of this information that they're armed with now, I think, to better use in long-term care or corrections than maybe, working at a chain pharmacy. So I know at my time when I was in school, like, I didn't know that this sort of workspace existed. Truthfully, I don't know if it's mentioned, at the schools of pharmacy. It's probably a little bit more known because I know myself and some other pharmacists, along with the optics department, have had plenty of students in over the years. So I think it's more widely known. And we have a couple of pharmacists on staff now that I took as students to nursing homes, and a couple of pharmacists that I took to correctional facilities to perform medication room audits and participate in P&T meetings that are now, full-time pharmacists here at Diamond. So
that part's got to be pretty special too. The
yes,
mentorship.
Yeah. It was nice to see, some people come back, so, and like you had mentioned, a decent amount of the pharmacists here at Diamond, whether it's consulting or production, have come from the retail space or what have you. So just overall for pharmacists, no matter what role you have, I think Diamond's a great place to, spread your wings a little bit. So.
Well, Tim, I really want to thank you again for coming on. This was a lot of fun and got to learn a lot about you and learn a lot about
thanks
what you
for
do.
having me. I know I'm not the most polished pharmacist here or what have you. So.
I disagree. I think there was plenty of polish on that. So that was great. Thank you again so much. And I hope you'll come back on.
Certainly, anytime.
PodcastRx features conversations with healthcare professionals. The statements and opinions discussed herein are for informational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered professional medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for the advice of an appropriately qualified and licensed healthcare professional. Therefore, listeners must not rely on the statements made herein. But we do hope you enjoyed them.
PodcastRx is a production of Diamond Pharmacy Services, the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. Keep up with our show on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. New episodes usually drop the first full week of each month. Where possible, please rate and review the show to help us reach more listeners. If you have any questions or feedback for PodcastRx, we'd love to hear it. Shoot us an email at podcastrx@diamondpharmacy.com. We thank you again for listening.